This is Yoko. He's one of the rare examples of auteur-driven artistry in modern gaming, and anytime his name is tied to something, you can expect to leave it with a sense of profound depression, horniness, or both. You could say I'm a bit of a fan of his works, given how commonly I speak of his contributions on my other socials. But while everyone is at least passingly acquainted with Yoko-san's work on Nier, the franchise that debuted his efforts wasn't as lucky in terms of positive recognition. The infamous Drakengard series is a bizarre one. Even by this man's standards, the story feels like he spammed autocomplete on a keyboard exclusively trained on Evangelion, Madoka, and Blackadder. The combat is so bare bones it serves as a greater test of mental fortitude than overcoming Souls-like difficulty spikes blindfolded with a DDR pad. And its soundtrack being labeled as psychological horror is not just an apt descriptor, but a sincere warning for the series too, as the themes these games cover, particularly the first one, are not for the faint of heart. Having said that, the cult following Drakengard attained over time is a sight to behold, even outdoing the passion for Nier itself in certain ways. So how come this came to be? Well, join me as I piece together the remnants of my sanity after years of exposure to Blood Pacts, Dragons, and Booba, where the aftermath of the experience gave me as much personal fulfillment as Automata's ending E, but for completely different reasons. Spoilers will be present, but will mean nothing to you, cause no amount of video essays will ever compare to playing these games yourself, so do stay a while. If you're all ready, let's begin. If playing games is your go-to pastime, and you tried out most genres of the medium that came your way, then chances are that you seldom find something that truly leaves you stumped in recent times. There's only a handful of game directors that still have this "what the hell" type of effect on an audience with basically every game that they work on. Hence why anytime you see the name Hideo Kojima, Suda51, or Yoko Taro tied to something, you know it will stand out, for better or worse. One fateful day in the early 2000s, this lovely individual helmed a project that swore to combine Ace Combat-esque fight sections, Musou-esque ground combat, and a variety of RPG elements, with a story that progressively became worse and worse the more of the game you experienced. This isn't in reference to the quality of writing, mind you. The story is consistently compelling, even if you just picked Drakengard 1 up due to a case of morbid curiosity. The worsening I alluded to relates to the outcomes of the story in their own right, which become increasingly more disturbing or discouraging to the point where you wonder if you should have stopped playing the game after the first ending you got, assuming you were looking for a personally fulfilling, conventional type of resolution. The cast of the first game is vastly cruder than in the likes of Nier, and while both series technically dabble in existentialism and the deconstruction of both their cast and gameplay boundaries, Drakengard pushes further in the direction of breaking down the player alongside all of that. For example, this is Kaim. On paper, he is the standard hero character protecting his homeland from an oppressive force. In an attempt to see this goal to its conclusion, amidst his near-death experience, he joins forces with the majestic dragon who was also on the ropes. The dragon hates humans, and Kaim hates dragons, as one led to his family's death, but they unite for the sake of one's own survival. Consider this a case of choosing the lesser evil, something that is inseparable from Drakengard 1 in its entirety. However, this is where things take a turn. More than once, Drakengard tells you that Kaim may relish in his acts of bloodshed more than a quote-unquote good guy should. So that means he's an anti-hero, right? Hell, maybe he's a straight-up villain, in an effort to get a point across regarding the futility of bloodshed and violence as concepts. I mean, you could make that argument, particularly if our opposing forces brought up better points to some everlasting moral questions, but really, there aren't any good individuals in Drakengard to speak of, either on Kaim's side or the Empire's side. The Empire is controlled by a cult that wishes to undo the world as a whole, leading to hell on earth, while our hero's party consists of individuals whose pastimes would nuke this video outright if they were described in detail. To put it lightly, they all have very dark pasts. And while all of this theming is deliberate, it also puts Drakengard in a strange spot as a media experience. It will most definitely leave an impression on you, but due to the nature of said impression, you may not want to revisit it afterwards. Story and world building are just one side of the coin though. Sure, the theming and dialogue may cause discomfort in an average player, but if the gameplay is great, that's all negligible, right? Yeah, well, that's where the other problem kicks in. Drakengard 1 is painful. Not in the case of being emotionally moving to the point where I feel bad for the characters, therefore feeling pain, though there is an element of that here as well. In this case specifically though, I mean that the experience of playing this game was still disturbingly draining. This game is effectively a muso. The entirety of a battlefield in a given mission is a collection of goalposts and mobile targets that you need to cut down with your weapon of choice. Generally, you would expect a loop of cut down army, attain your goal, rinse, repeat to have this effect of cathartic mayhem. You're one man destroying nations worth of soldiers after all, but such an emotional outcome would hinge on the actual combat being, well, fun. You may have a variety of weapons, but by nature of how slowly they level up, you'll likely just stick with the first one you're given and mid-max your slashes and magic usage, leading your mission runs to be rather flowcharty. Despite the occasionally epic vistas of the cinematics, stylishness is nowhere to be found in this game's priority list. And this is, ironically, a good thing for this game, considering how often the people accompanying you demonize the protagonist's bloodthirst, and by extension, the players. This is also where the fourth wall breaks really start to kick in. As was often brought up, Drakengard uses its unrefined type of muso gameplay loop as a means of desensitizing the player to violence in the same way as it would the protagonist. And the further along the campaign you are, the more will you wonder if the relatively barren environments and thousands of enemies you've ended will grant something worthwhile at the end of the tunnel. In most other cases, when defending a video game, these descriptions would feel as coping mechanisms for a poorly developed entry. But here, this is not only a game from a console generation as experimental as the PlayStation 2's, but it was also made by this particular individual. The same person known for betraying expectations of fans and unknowing individuals alike from his very beginnings in the director's seat. This is also a person who is brutally honest about her influences and intentions, looking at the self-deprecating comments towards his own talents, the common praise of Evangelion, and desire to tell profound messages on the meaning of life through whatever he wishes, including attractively designed androids because the man is unapologetically horny. Back to Drakengard. Even if budget constraints played a role in leading the team down a particular design route, the game's final design is still a bold choice to stick by, and an even bolder one is to have every new ending you reach be darker than the one preceding it. The closest thing to a conventional emotional conclusion in this game will be the default ending you reach, and hopefully stop at, rather than maxing out every single weapon to inevitably play a segment that has barely anything to do with the 30 or so hours that preceded it, at least gameplay-wise. Needless to say, or reiterate, the experience of this game will be more than most can stomach, even if it were readily available on modern systems, which it is not. So, while I appreciate Drakengard 1 from an artistic standpoint, even I, a self-proclaimed Drakengard fan, wouldn't jump to replay this game with the same fervor as I would the Nier games. However, this is just one of the games in the trilogy. Now, what about Drakengard 3? Drakengard 3 is a masterpiece, a declaration of profundity whose grace is unmatched, a transformative journey that succeeds in every conceivable way, a high that could never be reached lest it be through the death of— Wait, hang on there, Yakuza guy. Why did you skip over game number 2 in this list like this was a Devil May Cry retrospective and think no one would notice? Yeah, well, okay, here's the deal. The avoidance of addressing Drakengard 2 is an interesting case that, ironically, bears select similarities with the infamous Devil May Cry 2, in the sense that some of the core people, whose ideas made the original entries a success, didn't repeat their roles in the sequels. In the case of Drakengard 2, Yoko Taro was credited as the video editor and not much else. Hence why even the people who are vocal enjoyers of this bizarre franchise don't discuss this sequel as frequently as the other games. Regardless, I'll briefly address it here, because it serves as an interesting example of why a person like Taro, being at the helm of a project, makes all the difference in the end. You can have all the shocking imagery, deliberately restrained gameplay compared to your contemporaries, cryptic existential threats, and the like in your project. But not all of it will weld together without that drop of auteurism, or insanity, if you will, to which Drakengard 2 is the perfect testament. This isn't an awful game, no more than Drakengard 1 would be, at least. But unlike its predecessor, this sequel is frankly unremarkable by comparison. It's an adequately functioning hack and slash, or if you wish to label it more specifically, a muso, from the PlayStation 2 era. It actually has better gameplay than Drakengard 1, giving you more options in an average encounter. The story is more straightforward and generally what you would expect from an average JRPG taking place in a medieval setting. A hero with a problematic legacy who needs to prove himself goes on a perilous journey filled with loss, self-actualization, and world-shattering revelations all around. The supporting cast, for much of the experience, is also more straightforward in the writing. Noe and Legna have this fun shonen back and forth going on until the final stretches of the game. Eris is the childhood friend that is misled due to the ties of her upbringing, Mana is the girl that instigates change in the protagonist, leading to his growth and perhaps the development of romantic feelings, etc. You even have the cool uncle role filled in by Yurik, alongside a badass sacrifice that comes with it. You have the hateable villain who is just unabashedly evil in the form of Gizmor, and naturally, a last-second twist reveal surrounding Legna's true intent. The point where the Drakengard influence starts to show in this Drakengard game, however, is when you get in contact with the legendary Kaim and Angelus, which, by the way, if you came across this particular render of the man in some memes and had no clue why it was nowhere to be found in the first game, it's because this is Drakengard 2 territory. Honestly, while the writing of Kaim being a full-on psycho is too on the nose compared to the nuance of the first game, the resolution of his and Angelus' story is easily the most memorable part of the sequel. It reminds me of Ending A in the first game, with its bittersweet resolution and the fact the now infamous hero simply wanted to put his old friend's soul to rest. Consequences be damned. The clashes with the man not only give some gravitas to this otherwise safe experience, but they also have the domino effect of breaking down Mana as an individual more and more, with her not recalling the time she was manipulated by the Watchers when she was younger until she saw more of Kaim. By the end of the game, this does feel like what you came for. If you were looking for a familiar experience to the first game that was just slightly changed up for the sake of a sequel. However, if there's one thing that a Yoko Taro IP is always known for, it's the subversion of expectations. Tonally, you had no clue what Drakengard 1 would have in store for you on your first run, and the same applies to Drakengard 3. Hell, the fact that the final boss fights mechanics are a bigger gut punch to a returning player in Drakengard 3 due to the inversion of the way that the rings functioned between the first and third game's final bosses is likely the biggest testament to that. Oh yeah, and maybe the abject horniness of the third game would have been a shock to people only familiar with Drakengard 1 as well, but that's a story for later. Point being, that even though I went into Drakengard 2 with little knowledge of its events, I saw nigh every plot twist coming from a mile away, the only exception being Noe's transformation in the finale. And granted, a story hitting predictable resolutions isn't an issue in and of itself. But if the connective tissue is comparably safe, it lessens the memorability factor of the experience. To be fair though, there is one thing that this game does differently than the original, though it's ironically something that makes the original game look even better by comparison. It relates to its multitude of endings, or rather, the process of unlocking them. I may not have mentioned this before, but the first game's process of unlocking endings is somewhat unconventional, or at least it may have been for the time. Upon reaching one ending, you'll usually unlock previously invisible missions in your old chapters, which will lead you down a different narrative route, and thus a different conclusion, which will lead the process to reset itself until you reach the Japan section of the game and hear the melody of the bells. Also, the process of collecting and/or maxing out your many weapons evidently plays a role in this, hence where the desensitizing to violence really kicks in. In Drakengard 2, on the other hand, you seemingly play through the whole game again and again front to back to get the different endings. Granted, certain things are bound to be different, like your own perspective on given bizarre behavioral patterns of the cast, but the time investment honestly feels less worth it in this particular case. Full disclosure, I just looked up the new scenes on YouTube, as opposed to playing through the campaign anew. Cause unlike the first game, even if it may be a case of Stockholm Syndrome at this point, at least I knew there was something that would challenge my view on both the project and the medium at large there, in continuing to grind for the new endings. A matter that was made all the more apparent to me and reiterated upon in every new moment of the new campaign, which is not something that I could say for Drakengard 2. Again, if you take away Taro's avant-garde touch, and frankly, lunacy, you're left with a fairly by-the-book experience. Nothing bad by itself, but if this franchise is known for anything, it is the fact that it is not by the book in the slightest. Hence why Drakengard 2 is less frequently brought up or recommended, based on my impression in the community. Still, it's nice how Yoko-san never set out to decanonize the entry, instead treating it as its own continuity, and a nice experience where a different team took the same core elements of the world and went in their own direction. Oh yeah, and the OST here is less so a case of being psychological warfare, so that's another plus, depending on your perspective. Anyway, back to the game I wanted to talk about all along. Drakengard 3 is a masterpiece, a declaration of Okay, look, I know I've lined some of the preceding elements with enough snark to erase a baby elephant, but believe me when I say, this game is brilliant. Drakengard 1 is a game even its devout fans will call shit, and still adore, but Drakengard 3 is a game that I would unironically call great. It's a game without which something like Nier Automata simply wouldn't exist. It's more humorous when it needs to be, but never strays from its ultimate goal. It maintains the depravity of its dark moments when they come to be, and the whole package is one I think many Nier fans would genuinely click with, provided they were alright with crude humor being in abundance. But let's dial it back a bit. This entry is a prequel to the first game, showcasing a path of revenge where our girl Zero, with her dragon Michael, sets out to end her sisters. Said sisters are known as intoners, being revered for their power of song, and they're all evidently broken individuals in their own way. Due to their connection to Zero, and I'm not just talking of familial bonds, but ones inferred by our girl's particular eye accessory / evil omnipotent entity, they all stand out from other characters conceived by Yoko-san, which retroactively makes Zero one of the most compellingly complex leads the man has ever created. It also helps that we have so much lore available in playable form, due to the DLC campaigns dedicated to each of the intoners. Now, while the amount of adult humor in this game is, indeed, a lot, to the point where even dedicated video essay channels end up broken by its omnipresence, there's always more to Yoko-san's works than a lewd description might imply. Let's remind ourselves that a quote-unquote big booty android is one of the strongest pillars to one of the most profound stories about existentialism and epistemology in gaming. It may be a rougher road for some to undertake, but the conclusion to Drakengard 3 is right up there with the ones in Automata and Replicant for me, and I don't say that lightly. The game almost feels like the quintessential in-between of the first Drakengard and the Nier series, in terms of gameplay and symbolism. It even does away with the mundanity of Drakengard 1's combat, both by being a massive mechanical improvement, but also by allowing you to skip most encounters should you so choose. I definitely wouldn't recommend this on your first run, but if you're just going through the levels to find the weapons you missed out on earlier, this might help you out a ton, compared to how Drakengard 1 handled it to my recollection. The OST is unironically filled with enough bangers to nuke an average YouTube channel, metaphorically or quite literally considering its copyright system, because the fact that this collection of songs has Keiichi Okabe at the helm is likely to be enough of a seal approval in and of itself. Also, for what it's worth, this entry has far better level design compared to its predecessors. There's a variety of cool costumes that actually give you an upper hand in the grind towards the final ending, and the final boss? It is abject suffering distilled to its purest essence, and yet something I will still applaud every time it is brought up. Against all odds, I genuinely loved almost all of these characters, apart from maybe 4 and Decadus, both for ironic and legitimate reasons. And even with my distaste towards them, I couldn't even be mad at their inclusion, given how this experience blessed us with Zero, Mikhail, and the grace incarnate that is Accord. along with dozens upon dozens of quips that are either genuinely entertaining or become so absurd that they loop around from being overbearing to once again being absurdly enjoyable. I realize my commentary in the earlier parts of this video may have made you wonder if I even enjoyed Drakengard, but again, Drakengard 3 is my pride and joy, and it made me feel more inclined to revisit the first entry, therefore appreciating it quite a bit more than at the moment where I conceived the very first sections of the script quite a while ago. Oh yeah, you'll recall how I said Drakengard 3 is a prequel to Drakengard 1, which should in turn make this the ultimate prequel to the Nier series as well. So, how does it all connect? Oh, you poor sweet soul. You really wanna know? So, Drakengard 3 has 4 endings, the infamous one with the song that gave us one of the best deconstructions on YouTube being Ending D. Logic would dictate that the final ending unlocked in the campaign, a campaign that on paper should pride itself for being a prequel, would indeed be the one that would lead into the next entry in the timeline. Except no, the tie-in is found in a separate novella, or if you wish to play semantics, Ending A could technically also tie into a separate manga which would then lead to Drakengard 1, which is as Yokotaro as things can get at times. The man who decided that the quote-unquote joke ending to Drakengard 1 would lead to Nier. The man who wrote the true connective tissue between OG Nier and Automata through a grimoire story. The man who wrote 2 epilogues to Nier Automata, sharing them through stage plays exclusively, and then conceived a mainline Nier 3, which ended up being a gacha game whose end of service has long passed. By this point, we should know who we're dealing with, yet are still always surprised by his antics, and this is in part why I believe Drakengard 3 is Yoko-san in his purest form. The fact that even in a dedicated book chronicling his ever-evolving creative process, a book that seems fairly open about the developments of Drakengard 1 and 2 of the Nier games, his recollection of Drakengard 3 looks like this. Frankly, all of that makes my earlier observations feel infinitely funnier to me. Anyway, time to start the wrap-up. Drakengard is weird, there's no two ways about it. No amount of video essays, deep dives into the writer's psyche, or intoner doujins will replace playing these games for yourselves and deciding whether or not this clicks with you. Being a fan of Nier doesn't inherently mean Drakengard would be for you. Hell, you would be more likely to click with a series like Voice of Cards instead, which, by the way, is also better than is given credit for. As for me though, I was fortunate enough to have found value in Drakengard as well, and while I'd love nothing more than to write soliloquies about every fragment of these games, I don't have the privilege of excess spare time to do so, meaning that the choice of diving into the series, or not, falls onto you. Assuming you're not privy to emulation, which I presume would be done through legal means, of course, getting into the Drakengard trilogy through legitimate means is a mess. The physical copies are overpriced, 2 of the 3 games are exclusive to the PlayStation 2, and Drakengard 3 could soon be lost to time the moment Sony pulls the plug on the PlayStation 3 store. Theoretically, maybe we're inching ever so close to an HD trilogy or duology dropping by the time the next Nier anniversary transpires. Frankly, I have no clue, as I've been writing the script long before the latest anniversary came about, but I still maintain that a re-release of any form would be a great way to celebrate Drakengard's legacy and Nier's ongoing success, even in the absence of brand new projects. Lastly, you know I'm not one for the stereotypical like, comment, subscribe shit, and I'm very well aware that this video will tank compared to my usual Yakuza coverage, but that ultimately doesn't matter, because the point of this video was to say, number 1, I love Yokotaro's works, and number 2, if we ever get a revival of any kind, I can point to this oddity and say I was a fan of these games before every reviewer site on this platform starts calling it the second coming of insert watcher here. That aside, I am glad that some genuinely informative coverage has nonetheless been releasing on the series as more and more Nier fans look back on past related works. It's the same train of thought that made me look into Voice of Cards and Shinoaris, but at this point I realize we're getting really deep into overt ramble territory, so it's best to cut it off here. Closing words, Drakengard is one of a kind. Experience it if you're in a bind for something that will genuinely stay with you. And if you left this video with more questions than answers, then I probably did my job, because once again, this is a series you need to play to fully understand. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to reread the related novellas and fashion a deadly flower or two out of paper. So, until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!